start. If somebody else comes, we'll get them in here.
Came home for a couple of days.
I want to thank everybody for coming. My name's Tom Turner, Michelle Misty. I want to thank the board for allowing us to do this. This was not on their schedule. And I want to thank Michelle for her incredible researching. And Floyd Mansberger, whose company's Fever River Research was hired by the state in the mid-90s to do an archaeological study out there. And 70 years ago, I learned to swim off Jugtown Road at Sandy Beach. Nobody knew anything about Jugtown. And then I learned to drive on Jugtown Road, and nobody knew anything about Jugtown. Then in '61, I started my ceramic career with Mr. Joe Porcello, and we used clay from Illinois Clay Products. Now, Jugtown was on the west side of the lake, which we'll show you. Illinois Clay Products and AP Green was on the east end. And I should mention, I've got 60 years in the ceramic arts. It's a different lecture, but I'm kind of known all over the world. I did well because Joe Corsello got me to go to college. That's what happened. How many teachers out there? A couple. A great teacher sees the spark and nourishes the flame. And he got me and Larry Larson to go to Illinois State. And that started it, and 60 years later, I'm still going. So I come at all of this from a potter viewpoint, from a ceramic artist viewpoint. And Michelle's going to talk about all of the people and the genealogy and stuff. I think the rest I'll do with my slides. So I'll turn it over to Michelle. We'll have questions at the end, and then I want to go over stuff here that will show some of the things I talk about. So we'll do the lecture, some questions, and then I'll do a little bit of demo. I also want to say, while I'm here, these two tile were brought in tonight by Ray Rogers, whose grandfather was Claude, which is the property out at the state park. But these are Jugtown drain tile. It's the only thing we can identify, but we'll talk about that. Michelle?
Okay, well, I've lived in Felix Township my whole life, Carbon Hills in Felix Township.
You're good, okay.
And Felix Township ran from 113, from the Will County line, Diamond, Illinois, across to about Jugtown Road, or a little past there, Warman actually, and north all the way to the Illinois River. And it stayed as Felix Township until 1897 after the coal mining started, and they sectioned off the bottom 8 sections where all the coal mines were, and all the farmers abdicated and made Goose Lake Township. So when we talk, we're kind of interchangeable, Goose Lake Township, Felix Township, talking to the same place. I've always considered that I knew a lot about where I come from, and because I was a teacher, I always used the land that we were from and the local to get kids inspired and to want to learn through their own local history. So when Tom started on this adventure of finding Jugtown pottery, he asked me to delve into anything that would be a clue. And it took me far beyond going out and looking at the site. So I didn't start with this, but this is the thing I want to start with today, is about sorting the truth. We all know or think we know or heard from or have our stories. We know bits and pieces, or we misknow things. And so one thing is, in our booklet for Grundy Pioneers, we have that caption up there with that photo. And I've put on there, not correct photo. There were 2 William Whites in Felix Township. One is the William White that those of you who go out with your genealogy would find in the White Holderman Cemetery. He's from Ohio. That is not our William White the potter. So that's been corrected. Debbie's made a note of that. But that was the only picture we had of a William White. Somebody had it here and put that together. We don't have a picture of the William White the potter. And then it says, because this is, the number 92 is in your Grundy Pioneers book. It says, William White joined with Charles Walker of Chicago in 1855 to utilize the clay deposits of Goose Lake. They purchased a section of land in 1858 for $3,200, plotted the town of Jugtown, had a population of 55 in 1860. So there was a whole village with 40 potters, and cooks and blacksmiths and laundresses and housekeepers, etc. The rugged roads to Morris damaged the pottery, plus then there was a depression in the mid-1860s. This caused the partnership to dissolve in 1865. The Morris Herald reported in May of '66 that William White was preparing to manufacture clay sewerage tile at the west end of Canal Street, where we are, Illinois Avenue. He was busy erecting the kiln for burning the tile, and the molding machinery was on the road from the east. The operation didn't last long, as the property was bare by 1873. I'm going to take you from when William White met Charles Walker through when William White left here and went over to Utica and points further. And my comment on there is the lesson is to always question and keep researching, because the real story is a lot more fun than one line out of a textbook or something. Can you just hit buttons for me?
Okay, I'm not an apple person, a math person.
Hang on. Use this, and we'll just try it this way.
Because it doesn't go down.
Hit the next one.
Okay.
But there's a thing up there for play too. But I think this way will work fine.
All right.
In New York, which was, as they still think today, the center of the universe, Noah White was a potter, a very successful potter. He had 2 sons. He had probably more, and daughters. But he had Nicholas, and he had William. William's the second son. He is the father, Noah's the father, of our Jugtown potter, William White. Being the second son, perhaps, we really don't know why, but a conversation ensued as things were moving to the west quickly, that William would make his way out here and try this pottery business out here. Do you want me to keep doing it, or do you think you can?
I can reach it if you'd like.
I got it.
You got it?
Yeah.
Good, okay. In New York, besides Noah White, is the man named Charles Walker. He was a New York merchant, but he started out from a very poor family, ended up, he didn't get much education, but he was the village schoolmaster, very capable, became a clerk, learned how things worked, became an empire builder. He was a very smart risk taker. Charles was moving cargo in the New York area, the Hudson River, Lake Erie, in the eastern area. And what happened was he mistakenly bought some leather hides, and nobody in New York wanted leather hides. So he got them on his boat, came across the lakes, made his way to Fort Dearborn with his brother Almond, and they had all of that leather made into boots and shoes. And they brought all that here and they sold it in Chicago. Chicago was nothing at that time. We're talking about the 1840s. And what he learned was that they needed that I&M canal that they were always talking about, because you had to go across those lakes and then you got to Chicago, and then it was pretty dead-ended right there. The lakes are contained. But if the canal was coming through, it was going to let you come off from the Illinois River, cross up into Chicago that way, and also from the Illinois River you can get all the way to New Orleans and the Mississippi. That is westward expansion. That's why our canal is so important. that is why many of the first families who came here, they didn't come trekking up like Hogue on a wagon. They came on the boats, went to Chicago, and then got on that canal and came down this way. So a lot of your families in Norman Township in particular got here from the canal. Of course, you know the story of Armstrong, the Armstrong family, and they were actually over in Deer Park, Ottawa area, but William Armstrong, ran the ferry, dug the canal, made the effort for Morris to be the county seat rather than somewhere else. At any rate, into that whole mix, put Charles Walker, who went to Chicago, before it was Chicago, with his brother, said, this is the place where the action is, put up the largest warehouse in the country, and became the champion of the I&M Canal. One of the founders of the Chicago Board of Trade, gave the speech the day the canal opened, switched immediately to rail transportation because he knew that was gonna come, but pretty much invested in anything he could along the canal route so that all of our area would prosper and he would have more business. So the way it worked, if you go in the upper right-hand corner, follow across, and then take the next line, you're in Bridgeport, and then you get all the way to LaSalle. So they've sectioned it in 3. But that is all the sections along the canal. And you see it as what they had originally plotted out. There's a line for that. And then what actually got built and some little modifications. Point for our talk tonight is that to finance the building of that canal through depressions and political wars, etc., the land was sold in a crisscross fashion. One section was kept for the state to hold control, the next one was sold. And they just kept checkerboarding it like that all along. So there were people who wanted to invest in Charles Walker was one of those, and that's how he ended up knowing about the land that sits in the godforsaken Felix Township swamp prairie, but it had clay. And he actually was looking at grain and cattle because he was the largest of the grain and cattle transporters. So part of that land was for farming, not all of it was for the poverty. Enter a third figure, Charles Gould. Your Charles Gould, here in this town. There were the brothers, one was a druggist, he was H.C., and then Charles. Charles came from New York also, same time as Walker came, White soon after. Charles Gould was also a poor man, but an ambitious man. Clerked first, so he learned a business, and then found out that in Lamont, Illinois, they needed somebody to oversee the land sales. So he worked directly for the I&M Canal Commission, and he was in charge of selling all the land, speculating off of it, loaning the money, etc., etc., and he ended up here, and as you know, probably, well, you know everything that's named Gould, but he had the bank here. No money was ever traded out in this town without Charles Gould being at the, signing the paper on that and okaying that. And he is the person who signed for Walker and White to invest in Jugtown. He is the person when White couldn't make it work, took back and then sold to William B. Walker, Charles's son, the property, and then it made its way into more local things that you'll see in a minute. But all of this is, the only reason Jugtown turned up there is in such a fashion was because the canal was being built and we were deliberately bringing in industry. Much more interesting than all of these distribution centers. What's the next one? Not that you need to read it, but you'll see in the history of Grundy County, 1882, that it talks about little to attract any immigration to a place like Felix Township, and that's what they're talking about there. Jugtown was what its names applied, a place where pottery interest centered, a bed of good potter's clay was found. That's all what Tom knows that stuff inside out. And in 1853, William White, who was not of Chicago, it was Charles Walker who was of Chicago, but William White of New York came through Chicago under the partnership with Charles Walker, and he put up the buildings and the manufacturing and the drain tile, especially for the Chicago market. You want to switch to the next one? And then, of course, we know that it only lasts 1858 to 1866, I believe. And that was because even though they had 40 or 50 men employed, and their families were there, and it made a whole settlement, they had a school, they had a post office out in the middle of the prairie. And of course, there were farmers, some farmers around, like Lemuel Short. The Short family daughter became the Carper family, you know, Mr. Carper and then Lance Martin, and it keeps going down and down. At any rate, there were farmers out there. The Holdermans were out there already. The roads were very poor. People hardly went into Morris. We're talking 1850s. They went when they needed to, but the roads were pitiful. On the east side at the county line was a Kankakee feeder, a canal that came up from the Wilmington River, crossed over, aqueduct over the Illinois River, Des Plaines River, excuse me, into the I&M Canal at that point. White could not make that work to use that way to get to the canal, for a lot of reasons, mostly because the Kankakee Transportation Company was having political arguments and financial woes, and it wasn't always open. And so anyway, the man was stuck. They could make the pottery, but they couldn't get it here without breaking it. And so the hauling was really bad, and it didn't prove successful, and everything sort of fell apart. His potters had come with him, some from New York, some from Ohio, some from other places, and some were local men. There was a Lyons, there was Chandler, there was Pratt. Actually, James Pratt, one of the potters there, died while he was at work and is buried in the Short Cemetery. So it's an interesting combination of people from everywhere who were either apprentice potters or very successful potters from New York who decided to join in. And so these are some of the first people that were ever on the south side of the river, if you want to put it that way. The Miller family was there, the Bargos. Can you flip it one more time? So this is Charles Walker. He's the partner. The other thing that happens that's deadly for, pardon the pun, for William White is that his father dies in 68 and Charles Walker had died in 66. So his father, who was a great backer and had signed many notes to help this venture succeed, and Walker, who had his investments into it, all had these loans out, you know, invested with Gould and other people, investors, speculators. You know, William wasn't the businessman so much as he was the great potter, and he really wanted to stay with that. So when Charles Walker died and his son William B. came along, he'd been doing his father's work for a long time. I think Charles had stopped thinking about Jugtown. He was on many, many, many other big things and work. You'll go into the old newspapers, you see him in all of the old newspapers speaking for the Board of Trade, speaking in farmers' agricultural places, constantly drumming up business and making Chicago what it was today. Some people say he was the founder of Chicago. Not the historical founder, the commercial founder. Mary, you want to hit the button again? That's just a list. We're not going to try to read it. That's just a list of the people in 1850 who lived in all of Felix Township, from 113 to the river, from the county line east to the Mazon Creek west. That's it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. About 28 different families are on that list, and of course, they only list the men, because we women are just a number up there somewhere. But that's about the kind of environment, I mean, it really was prairie land. There's also forest land there, and go ahead if you want to turn. This is your verification that there's 2 William Whites in Felix Township. This is the civil, where you had to register for Civil War duty. You'll see William White, 40, White, Potter, New York. Then you see Abram White and William White again, they're brothers. William White, 40, Farmer, Ohio. That's the one whose picture is mistakenly put with the story about the Potter. Ever been to the White Holderman Cemetery off Little Collins Road? You know?
Yes.
Yeah, right past the creek on Pine Bluff Road. Turn again. Tom may show you this too. This is Lucy Winterbottom. Winterbottom's farmed in the area. She drew that map in 1858 of Jugtown from memory. And there are, you see all the buildings. There are homes that some of the families actually had for themselves. There are rooming houses, so to speak, for the single people. There's a bakery, there's the post office, as I said, there's the school, which was the original Jugtown school. Later on, there was a second Jugtown school in the 1900s. And when, I don't know how much you'll say about that, but this map is available in some of these other books that we're gonna tell you about. And it's kind of neat to see because it's very Little House on the Prairie, you know, it's very rustic.
What's there now?
All that's there now is Goose Lake Prairie Park and part of the pond, if you will. And that's it. Well, if you were with Tom, he'd walk you out to where they dug to look for the kiln, but there are no buildings. Buildings were there for a time. We're gonna get to that next, I think. Oh, that's just Charles Walker, who died in 68, and you know, it's bad to lose the person who's the source of everything. Next. Let's see how quick we can get through these. Tom's gonna show you this one too. What happened when William White had to close the Jugtown Pottery Factory is he came to Morris, somewhere here. This is all behind us, which is now that green space behind the building we're in. And he was there for a very short time, and then he moved to Utica, Illinois. Next. The reason he went to Utica, first of all, was he wanted his own, you know, to do some really serious work. And this man, Clark, also from New York, was in Utica, and he had all the cement business wrapped up. All the time they were building the canal, they needed cement. So, right where you go into Starved Rock, so you're over the river, Starved Rock entry is on your left, on the east side. But if you went past that entry and up the hill to where that intersection is of 178, there's a small industrial place where they sell sand and Clinton's there. That was where William Clark had his cement factory. The man made a fortune, and he was the big entrepreneur of Utica, Illinois. He knew William White. So William didn't last in Morris, just went down the road, picked up with the Clark White and Company in Utica, Illinois. And you have to come down this ad, which was from 1872, to see Clark White and Company of Utica providing that clay sewer pipe. So William was never out of work. As bad as we used to feel for him, you're like, oh God, he went to Jugtown and he didn't work, poor man. Ha! Don't worry about it. He did fine. Next one.
I don't know how to scroll down. Oh, there it is, okay.
We're learning as we go. Okay, then, it doesn't matter. All this is doing is saying that he went, made a bigger company, And they did all of these pottery, drain tile, sewer pipe, hollow brick, and it was all for the Chicago market. So when Chicago was built, this is where they were getting their stuff from. And the article is fascinating, and I'm not gonna read it all to you, but if you ever have time sometime, this whole thing is gonna be here, so you can just sit and read it when you want. Go to the next one. William's son Henry, in 1879, opened the Utica Drain Tile Works. He was the boss at this time. Father was still working, but Henry had taken over. And you'll see up here that he's in Utica, and then you don't see all the prices and everything, but the calibers and the how many feet and the cost and everything. This is a very prosperous venture. So I'm glad that they kept going and didn't go back home or whatever they might have otherwise done. Because this area was becoming booming not only for towns needing drainage, but for farmers needing drainage. They were just learning to drain the land off, and of course so much of our land is swampland. Next. By this time, William has enough resources accumulated. He's paid off the debt. He gave back what he couldn't afford to William S. Walker of the Jugtown land. Half of it was bought by Mr. Collins, you know that name. And William Walker then sold the rest to, first of all, a man named Thomas, who was Collins's brother-in-law. And then it comes into more modern times, which we're going to talk about, the families you're probably most familiar with. But by 82, this man is back on his feet, and on his own. No problem. He moved his whole family to Ottawa in the early 1880s. That's just the deed where Noah's children, that would be Nicholas and Julia, his wife, and 3 sisters and another brother, all paid off the debt for William. They took from Noah's estate, because Noah had died, and they paid off whatever was owed, and that was the end of right here you'll see it says, William White and others, quitclaim deed to William B. Walker. So he no longer had to worry about the debt, and he went on and made that Ottawa factory. Next. White's relinquish of Jugtown property and land to William B. Walker, Charles's son, included all these people. These are all the siblings. Elmira, Sophia, and Mary Ann were not even married. But it was a big family in New York, and that's where the genealogy came in. I had to track all these people, one by one. You read something and it seems so simple, but then you get into it and it's very complicated. They weren't mad at William for all of this, which in the beginning, Tom and I thought, what the heck, this guy just couldn't do it, he wasn't as good as his brother, what's the problem, you know? I've cut him a lot of slack since then because he was a very strong man. Next. Simultaneously, William Armstrong, George Reynolds, and John Donnelly tried to do a Utica pottery company of their own, manufacturing jugs and stoneware, because obviously the supply of clay is magnificent in this area. Goose Lake is a very special kind, but up in Utica where Clark was and what he'd found, it was great too. Those 3 men are the William Armstrong of Morris, that built the jail, did everything, had the first ferry, and George Reynolds and John Donnelly were also captains on the Inland Canal. So they thought they would maybe get in on the business rather than being at the mercy of, is the water high, is the thing closed, and all the things that come with running a canal boat. So there were many people along the canal who took advantage of the opportunity to become a big businessman. Poor William, wonderful as he is, we should do a whole thing on the Armstrongs someday. He never got paid for all of what he did building the certain areas of the canal and all. They paid him in script, and then it was no good because all the finances for that fell apart, and he ended up not having anything financially. Go ahead. The Whites then went to Peoria. So when you see Peoria Pottery and the Peoria Pottery Company and the Paving Company, which ran until 1902, William White was one of the owners of that. So he left Utica, left Ottawa, I mean, he kept moving, and then ended up in Peoria. Next. And that's the John Clark who went to Iowa for a few days. While he was gone, William White left and organized the company. I don't know if that was put in the paper. You know how papers sometimes juxtapose things, so it makes it more interesting. I don't know why those two little things appeared at the same time, but he left Clark, he left the Ottawa business, and he went to Peoria. Next. So, this right here is Pine Bluff Road, and it makes that little curve right when you're at the Prairie, and it makes that, there's always a lot of accidents there, so you know what I'm talking about. So right here, where that curve is where the potteries were. And in this particular map, which is from 1874, William B. Walker is already owning the old pottery land. You will notice that Holderman owns a lot around him. Holderman then loses from his own investments, if you know your local history, and Collins got all of that land. The house and everything that had been Holderman became Collins. That was Jeremiah Collins. O.S. Miller always was up there, and he had a son, grandson, George S. Miller. If you haven't seen the book Growing Up in Goose Lake, that tells you all about, not everything that I've said certainly, but about what it was like to live there. That he plats out, maps out, the farm, the orchard, where the chickens are, where the cows are, where the this is, where the that is. I mean, it's got everything. So and then this, of course, is the famous Goose Lake. Most of us have heard about it more for, as much as Clay, we heard about it for hunting. Next. There were ducks everywhere. There's still ducks everywhere. Then, time passes, and in 1893, William Anderson owns a lot of the property that has the clay on it. Where the A.P. Green factory went, what we always called the clay pit, that's what it was, which is just east of the Prairie Park. What happened in 1893 was that man was talking about doing what Pottery White had done and making use of the clay. The lake had actually, the big lake had actually been drained by Niles Osborne and other people over time, trying to turn it into farmland. Well, then they find there's the clay there, and it becomes more valuable. William Anderson threw off a bunch of hunt clubs, Chicago people, Joliet people, wanted to keep it local, and supposedly was going to go after making his own clay, which he did. Tom will probably talk about that. Keep going. Other people that lived right up Jugtown Road, when you're on your way into the Prairie Park, you had the Bargo family. They were always the road commissioners and supervisors for the whole township. You had that Miller family I talked about. I've mentioned Bargo. I mentioned Holderman, who then became, that land all became Collins's. The Wainwright farm, which is where Dave Groney owns now, and put in 4 wells to flood the areas so people could, there'd be ducks. So there's still the people who love to hunt out there. And then, of course, our modern family, which is the Rogers family. They came there in 1902 and lived right where it said the old pottery. That became the Rogers farm. And all of my growing up time, it was the Rogers farm until Goose Lake Prairie. It was formed in 1869. So when you look a little later then, here's Pine Bluff Road, and you'll see there's still a Jugtown school. Walker is using this for farmland, and everywhere that was Holderman's is now Collins's. And then you'll see where the lake has been drained back, and the clay was visible enough so that when William Anderson came along, he could sell to some, forget the name of that factory, the first company that did the clay pit Doesn't matter.
Illinois Clay Products?
No, that's the modern
That's on the
one.
west side,
It's a,
or east side.
yeah. And then, you know, you also see in this area that the Winterbottoms live below Pine Bluff Road. This is Jugtown Road. And there's Holderman land, and this track was the EJ&E track. So that all comes down through what we now call the Goose Lake Association people, with all the modern homes out there. Next. And I told you that what used to be all Felix from the river to 113, this became Felix in here. This is Carbon Hill, Coal City, and whatever happens up to the four-way stop, as we call it, 113. That got sectioned off, and that is now all what is called Goose Lake Township, and it's still that way today. Pete Kodat is still the township supervisor. Next. And the Collins family, who I've mentioned a couple times now, that house still stands. When you come on Pine Bluff, come over the Mazon Creek, you'll see a little sign that says, I think it's M&M Cakes or whatever. Do you know where I'm talking about? That is back there is that house. That was Holderman's house, and then Collins's house. And just before there, you can turn on what's Collins Road. And you used to be able to take that road and ride all the way along the river and go all the way to where now Dresden Nuclear Plant is. But things changed because Collins sold the land so that we would have Dresden, so we would have other Heidecke Lake went in there. I mean, things changed. But the daughters' descendants are still here. These two daughters, Alice May and Genevieve, were one married in Anderson and the other married in McCabe. So if you got to, what's Char's last name?
Fruin.
There you go, Char Fruin belongs to one of them. And then of course all the McCabes, you know. And Peggy Harside was the other, the Anderson daughter. And the hunting still happens, but this whole thing right here is from 1915 in one of the county books. And that whole thing of ducks there, that was their dad, Frank Collins' pride and joy. The man loved to hunt. Next. And just to show you how, this is 1927. That's Frank Collins. This is the reporter from Field and Stream. This is Porky Ferrero from Carbon Hill. This is Roland Bargo, who lived right on Jugtown Road. And that is Louis Mumbrum, who worked as a hand on the Collins farm. And they were in a big article in 1927 for that reporter wrote. So my dad said he single-handedly took out the prairie chickens in Felix Township, but I don't think that was true. Next. And then where we were talking, where the Pine Bluff Road curves at the pottery, this is the Rogers farm. Two brothers, each had their own house on that farm. And in the back, I think, is the remaining building from the pottery works. That long, it was a drying building, wasn't it? Or
Yes.
storage?
But that, the long drying shed, production shed, to the right of that,
Yeah.
that's the school.
Ah,
The
the little
school,
one.
yeah, the school was moved there and made into a machinery shed.
Okay, next. And that was the last thing that I remember, is the barns were there until they got busy with Goose Lake Prairie State Park, when Gunnar Peterson said we need to save our prairies and our green spaces. And there was a big controversy between the industrialists, like the clay pit people, and the farmers and the people who wanted green space. And it ended up, of course, that we got Goose Lake State Park, and then the Rogers family had to move off in time. Their houses got, one burned down, the other one got moved into Coal City, and that building was out there for a long time. I taught Norma Rogers and her brother in the 70s, and I think they still were out there.
Michelle,
Yeah.
while this is up, that's half of the original production drying shed. And the kilns, which I'll show you, the bases, were right outside this barn. But Claude's barn was only half of what used to be there, and they
Wow.
moved the other half somewhere.
Yeah. One thing you find about the old times, they moved houses, buildings of all kinds, every which way. And they end up in the most interesting places, which is kind of what got me all started with these properties. I think that might be, is there one more? No, okay. In 1969, the land of Jugtown, mostly then Collins land, plus some adjacent acreage sold to the state of Illinois, thus it was like Prairie State Park was born. The dig at Jugtown came much later when Floyd Mansberger went in and dug, but the search goes on. Ta-da. Collins family, when they sold, got a lot of money for selling that land to the state, and that helped them finance other things that benefit all of us. Ready?
I'm ready.
I've been ready for a while.
Everybody stand up and stretch.
Yeah.
We're
Okay,
gonna
take
change
this one out of the
computers
way.
here.
I'm gonna switch to Tom's computer. That's the first time I've ever had to have somebody go one by one, and go through those slides, and it's cumbersome, but we did it.
I think it's really neat that Ray Rogers is here tonight. I mean, he's descendant of the property where the pottery was. And when we talk about Jugtown, and Michelle brought it up, you know, Grandpa has this or that, you have to go back 160 years. See, we've lost track of how long ago it was. And if it hadn't have been for Mansberger, we wouldn't have the information that we do.
And I didn't put the picture on here of Claude holding the meerschaum pipe that he says was made, a gift to him from somebody who used clay from Jugtown Pottery Factory.
You want to do that, Mary? Or you want me to?
I can do it. Thank you.
Okay, we call this facts and fiction because there's been so many stories. Information in the Morris Herald and so forth is done by a reporter. It's their idea of what went on, and a lot of it's inaccurate. Go ahead. Am I in anybody's way?
You can go, Brent.
I told you about my early time on Jugtown Road, going to Illinois State. I came back, pardon me, Mary, where's that light? It was on top of the projector. 1967, as an art major, I came back for the summer, and I decided to build a salt kiln. And I'll explain that. I'd never built a kiln, I'd never fired a kiln, but I was going to build a kiln. This is my father, Tom Turner. He's also known as Red Turner. He was a carpenter, actually helped form Dresden. That skinny guy is me. This is Mr. Joe Corsello, and my grandfather Henry Turner, and my dad's sister Avis Ryan. We're trying to figure out how to put an arch on a kiln. I'll explain salt glazing because that's what William White did. Early New England, all of that early ware was, well, you had what we called red ware, which was low temp, but glazed with lead. And then they went to salt glazing, which was more healthy. You fire the pottery to maturity, which is like 2350 Fahrenheit. You throw salt in. That liquefies and vaporizes, and you have sodium and chlorine. The chlorine goes out as a fog. The sodium attacks everything in the kiln, the pottery, the walls, the arch, everything. So every time that kiln is fired, it gets glazed. And on a lot of 19th century pots, you'll see drips. I didn't know what I was doing. I fired 2 or 3 times and pretty much blew everything up. There's one pot, there's a small case out in front where I've donated 12 pots that cover my 60 years. And the one pot that I saved from this venture is out in that case. And to show you how I didn't know what I was doing, that's 12 inches of concrete. Next. That slab stayed there for many, many years. Here we are firing. I took a bed apart, made a girdle. Whenever you have an arch, you have to girdle it to keep it up. That's me, college classmate. That's my great old friend Paul Root, Paul's Corvette. This is at 837 East Main Street, 1967. Ulivy, I think it's Ulivy Propane in Coal City. Yeah, I got propane burners from them. Ignorance is bliss. I went back to college. Go ahead. And again, Noah White, he was a very well-established pottery family up there. They went through about 4 generations. William would have been trained in this manner, and I still wonder why things went the way they did here at Jugtown. Next. Here you can see the lineage. And here in 1856, S is taken off son. That's when William came to Jugtown. Next. This is an old sale bill. Next. This is erroneously placed out at the park. It is not Jugtown, Felix Township. That is Noah White's Utica, New York plant. When they did the presentation at the park, they took some liberties, and this was one. Next.
That's what drives me nuts. That was 1905 in New York.
Yeah.
And they even label it
It's,
1905.
yes, yeah. Now this is Noah, a jug from Noah White. If you go back to this period of time, it was pre-refrigeration, pre-glass canning jars. So all of our food had to go into pottery, especially for the winter. All of your meats, all of your vegetables, all of your fruits, vinegar, all of your liquids had to go into pottery for the winter. Now right there it says N. White, Utica. What kills me is that in the 9 years William White was at Jugtown, he never stamped his name on a single pot. It's maddening because his father's plant stamped every single pot. Now why would you stamp a pot? 1, pride. 2, advertising. And I don't think the product was good enough for William to put his name on here at Jugtown. I went through the Heralds on microfilm. They never ever advertised in Morris. Morris merchandisers bought stoneware from Ohio. Stoneware is the term used for high-fired pottery, and all of the stoneware came from Ohio. And I'll show in another illustration, we can date pots by shape. And this is the 1830s, very bulbous. I'll show you an illustration. Go ahead. With salt glazed pottery, which I'll show you up front here after the lecture, they would put a clay inside that turned into a glaze called Albany Slip from Albany, New York. And they didn't know that this glaze is up at Manuka. Now when I talk about glaze, this is the body. This is the glaze. In other words, that's the body, that's the clothing. And it's extremely unusual to find one material out of the ground to make a perfect glaze. But William didn't know about this. And I'm finding all kinds of clays here that turn into glaze, even our river silt after a flood. The geological people talk about a potter's clay above the coal and then fire clay below the coal. Now fire clay is high temperature clay, what you would use to make brick to build kilns. We don't know if William only used the potter's clay or if he mixed it. All over Morris were clay pits, coal, small coal mining, and the clay was there, so they brought the clay up and they made bricks and stuff. So all of the Morris coal distributors also sold brick. That's another lecture I'd like to give, the brick companies of Morris. Next. So there's a N.A. White and Son, Utica, New York. Stamped, 5 means 5 gallon. Next. Very beautiful stoneware, perfectly made, great clay, incredible decoration, White and William. See, 1863, William was here. Could have done all of the same things. The only thing is that maybe William wasn't a potter for his father. Maybe he did something else, you know. We don't know. But that's a 4-gallon butter churn.
That's interesting, because on the census, he's listed as a farmer.
Yeah. It takes a damn good potter to make a churn or make a pot that big. And that's probably 30 pounds of clay. Next. Now, this blue decoration could have been something as simple as the same clay with cobalt in it. Cobalt oxide, cobalt carbonate. Cobalt is blue no matter what happens. And that was put on with a goose quill stuck into a cup. You'd fill this cup with the blue slip and you got a goose quill, and that's how you're drawing this decoration. Next. Next. Sometimes they'd get a little silly, but you know, a bowl for whatever use in the kitchen. You could, and when they stored food for the winter, they would wrap a cloth around the top, tie it, and sometimes wax it. So everything was utilitarian. While I'm thinking of it, see the gray and the tan? I want to talk about, because it affects these pots, and you'll see in other slides, but when you have a fuel burning kiln, wood, coal, oil, gas, propane, you can regulate that kiln so that there's insufficient combustion. You get carbon monoxide, and it pulls oxygen out of the clay and the glaze. Now where that's gray, it's reduced. Where it's tan, it's oxidized. And I brought a jug, that big jug's got the same thing. So a lot happens in a firing atmospherically, temperature, and I think they had a lot of loss back then. Next. Batter jug for your pancakes in the morning. The pot was thrown, the spout was thrown, the lugs for the handles were put on later. You know, the potter makes the pot, and then somebody else comes along in a large pottery, cleans it up a little bit, puts the handles on, decorates, etc. Another guy puts it in the kiln, another guy fires it. So, you know, a lot of people involved, and it's mainly hard manual labor. Southern folk potters told me they would throw a ton of clay a day, and they were paid by the gallon. Next. Stoneware salt glazed pitcher. Next. Storage jar. Next. Another one. So then William gets on the yellow brick road, comes to Morris. These are called plank roads, and as Michelle said, you know, just dirt roads, and where it was really muddy, they would put down planks or trees. Next. Michelle showed this. Next. And that. Go back one. Okay, go ahead. Next. There are the kilns. See the tile works up here. White, they had a town square, they had a hotel, they had everything, saloons. There were 114 people at Jugtown at one point. Now, that's wives and children. Next. Those are the kill bases at the end of Claude Rogers' barn that we saw, and that's the kill bases that Mansberger did the archaeological study on. Now, it'll come up next. This Mansberger kind of drew up relative to the shards and stuff they picked up, but industrial component up there. I think the pottery was there, the tile company was there. And Michelle and I went to Springfield. Somebody told me there were 17,000 shards in Springfield. So Michelle and I went down. There were not 17,000, but
Like it.
but they were just small pieces of surface shards. That property had been plowed and disked. In fact, where those 3 kilns were was the cow lot. So, you know, any shards would have been stomped and broken and so forth. Mansberger never did go or find a shard pile. I've asked for another dig, which I doubt if they'll ever do. Next. This is the canal, but this is kind of like digging clay. Next. Or you use horses with drag pans. Next. What do you do with clay? How pure is the clay? Are there rocks in the clay? Is there coal in the clay? This is called a Muller mixer. And those 2 big steel iron wheels revolve and crush whatever you put in there. And then underneath is a screen, whatever mesh you want, probably vibrating. And that crushes and screens the clay. Now, you would want a finer clay for the pottery than you would for the tile. The other thing I'll say right now while I'm thinking about it, and you'll see up on the table, the drain tile was not salt glazed. The pottery was, but those tile are not salt glazed. They're vitrified, which Michelle had on one of the pages. Vitrification means fired to complete hardness. It's impervious to water. Next. So, these were still in existence when I went south in the late 60s. Thank you, U.S. Army. Anyway, you put clay and water in here, a mule or horse walks in a circle, and you've got clay coming out. Next.
So that does what that big machine you showed before does?
No. That first machine ground it up.
Okay.
This is mixing it with water. I took these slides off the internet months and months and months ago. But this is the same setup in England, inside a building. You can see that the horse or the mule's actually got a path worn there. Next. And I'm going to talk about extrusion. You put the material in, it's ground up, and it's pushed out. Now, whatever's on that end is going to be what comes out. The other analogy is your toothpaste. Your toothpaste comes out round because the die on the end is round. If the die on the end was square, you'd have square toothpaste. Okay, next. So here's an early tile machine. Again, the clay goes in here, already tempered with water. It's kind of mixed up and extruded out. The tile comes out here. He pulls that down. See these wires? He pulls that down and cuts the tile. So as long as you keep that clay feeding in, you know, and I said earlier about the Coleman hardware, which I'll come to again, but this is unskilled labor. You know, it's not like having to throw pots. Next. A little bit more complex. You know, it's getting all mixed up, comes out. Now this is strange because it's extruded here in that shape, and then one wire cuts it. It comes down here, all of these wires cut it, and you got brick. The very first brick, and I didn't put it in this lecture, but were slop molded. You had a wooden frame of, let's say, 2 brick shapes. You slopped clay in there, scraped the top, and dumped it out. And all of the early brickyards in Morris were slopped. The brick machine wasn't invented until 1856. Chapin had a brickyard here in 1842. Next. Once again, you know, they get more complex. Next. And here's a big setup. The only thing I don't understand here, this looks like a spiral setup, but those bricks would have been cut perpendicular. So that kind of confuses me, but you get the idea here. There's your water tank, clay. Next. In a more advanced sketch, this guy's flattening clay to maybe put in a mold to make a chimney cap. This machine is extruding sewer tile. Now, sewer tile has a lip, more complex than the tile we've seen so far, where the simple tile is extruded and cut. These were actually, formed. Next. And I threw this in. These are extruded building block. And a lot of garages and buildings in Morris were built with salt glazed extruded block. Remember Will's Garage,
Yeah.
47 in Illinois Avenue? That was salt glazed extruded block, not made in Morris, but talking to Wild Bill Atkinson on Facebook, if we date the buildings downtown and then look up who was making brick, in other words, we can put those together, which I may do. Next. How do you get brick? If there's no kiln, how are you going to fire a brick? This is a stove kiln. Thousands of bricks laid up with fire boxes and flues inside, and they would fire this. The inside brick would get hard, the outside hardly touched. They'd take it all down, use the good brick. What wasn't fired high enough would be put into the next stack. This is called a stove kiln. And this is how you make the very first brick to build a kiln so you can make more brick. Next. These are, what do I want to say? Replicas, like you might see at Henry Ford Museum or something like that. These are called bottle kilns, and that's what White had. That's what was behind this building. They do not have the fire boxes in these replicas, and the doors are pretty high. But here's your iron bands. There's probably an arch right here. And anytime you have an arch, you have to have a girdle to keep that arch in place. Otherwise, it collapses. Next. Here's a real kiln. Here's your iron bands going all the way up. But here's your fire boxes, 6 or 8 of them. Wood or coal goes in there. That's your ash pit. And again, this is that bottle shape. Here's your door. The 3 at Claude Rogers' barn, you'd be loading one, you'd be cooling one, you'd be firing one. So they could just run constantly. And that's why, I talked about thousands of tons of tile. Next, close up. Tremendous heat. If you're trying to get 2350 in the chamber, this firebox is, 2450. And the bricks would melt depending what you had access to. Next. Okay, this is out of Mansberger's book. This is a drawing mock-up of the kiln base at Claude Rogers' farm. And these kilns were 25, 30 feet in diameter. They must have been 60 feet high. And there was one interview when Claude was growing up, or it might have been Claude's son. The kiln was higher than he was, but probably when Ray grew up, they were just flat.
Yeah, they were all
See,
done.
bricks are hard to get; they're expensive. So if you could steal bricks off something, you could build something else. Potter down in North Carolina that I was near, it was the Penland Pottery. He took bricks out of the pottery kiln and put them in his house, and they were the bricks inside a kiln by the firebox are going to be glazed, So next. Okay, this is a tile Pete Kodat has, and also the tile Ray brought in tonight. They're reddish. That's a lot of iron in that clay, and that wouldn't have been good clay for the pottery. And in one of the interviews on the papers, someone commented, they also got clay off the Holderman farm. And what I found, I mentioned earlier that potter's clay, coal, fire clay, but surface clay is a lower temperature clay. What I'm turning into a glaze at 2350 degrees Fahrenheit is a perfect clay for a brick at 1600 degrees. See where I'm getting at there? So this is a different clay. It's very coarse, but that's one of Pete's. Next, that's Pete's. See that clay there is too coarse to throw. Next. These are all different drain tiles of the period. That is stone, and they actually bore through that stone to make a drain pipe, which I can't imagine doing. But the other thing,
Sewer tile. That's sewer tile or just
that's drain tile, yeah. The other thing is, look how small these are. Even some of the Jugtown, you know, they were learning as they were going. Why would you put a 2 or 3 inch tile in a field? You know, one, it's going to fill up with dirt pretty quick. Next. Okay. William White, coming from Noah White, great pottery family. We don't know if he threw pots. We can assume. This is Davis Brown on a stand-up treadle kick wheel, where you stand on your right foot and you kick with your left. And that's how I learned to make pots at Illinois State. I never did throw pots in high school. Davis Brown came from a pottery family near Atlanta. They all moved up around Asheville. You can't see them real clearly, but these are, I don't even know how to explain them, but they're 2 pieces of metal on a hinge, and you slip it under the pot. It's a pot lifter. So they would throw directly on the wheel head and just lift those pots off all day long. And, you know, I'm sure 10, 12-hour days. Next. Okay, this is a sale bill by Underwood, but here's some of the things that all of these potters back then would make. And all of them have to do with food. And you can't see the prices, but pots were like 10 cents a piece. Next. Okay, this is important. These are ribs, template ribs. Southern potters called them chips, but they're handmade tools made by the potter himself. And this notch, that's a lip to a jug. We use the flat end, which I'm going to demonstrate when I'm done here. But we use this flat edge in the process of throwing, and these guys would have a template for the lips. Now, that's a signature. Now, maybe that's how they kept track of how much they made, how many they made per day, per week, per month. One possibility. Here again, the pride, you know. And you can't see it, but there's a little tiny notch right there, and that would be the bottom of jugs, or sometimes you've seen beer steins with a little roll down there. Next. This is also out at the state park, and I thought I was onto something relative to that last photo. This split lip is very identifiable. Next. And one of the potters from Jugtown did go to Galena. And I told Michelle, I said, hey, we're onto something. But we looked at thousands of shards and never saw another split lip. So I think it was a little liberty that the state took. Next. Okay, this is how we can date pottery by shape. Your early 1830, 40 are ovoid. You get into 1870, 80, and they're straight up and down. That's one way. The changes in glazes and the changes in firing is another way. I can tell if a piece is fired with wood or with coal. Next. Here's another schematic. Foot, body, belly, shoulder, neck, lip. That's how we talk about pots. Now, come on, light. These are thrown, and I'm going to explain this, but these are jollied. This piece was made, that piece was made, and then attached. Same thing here. Next. Jigger jolly takes a very talented person to throw pots. Takes semi-skill to run a machine. This is a potter's wheel with a plaster mold with an arm that goes up and down with a template. So the wheel's spinning, you put some clay on there, you bring this arm down, it does the bottom of the plate. 10 seconds, that plate's done. So this is jiggering. Next. And that's a real jigger wheel, and I think it's probably for a crock lid. Next. This is jolly, where the template goes down inside, which would be good for bowls, mugs, things like that. Now the plaster is going to draw water out of the clay. They're going to dry faster. They'll pop that out, dry the mold out, use it again. But this is jolly machine. Next. Now this is out at the state park. And
Picture of it, these are the thingies.
there's a shard. This would have been jollied in a plaster mold that had this surface. That's the other thing, see? You can put a decoration on the plaster surface, bring that arm down, it's all done. But we never saw a shard like that in Springfield. Next. I'm going to talk about lip to lip and foot to foot. That's how they stacked the kills. They did not have kill shelves back then. And that's why I say there was a lot of loss. This nice big jug that I brought that's in the front, see that tiny lip? That was stacked lip to lip, foot to foot, until the kill is full, you know. Next, Germany, salt glazing. Salt glazing started in Germany in the 1400s, and they kept it a secret. It didn't get to England until 1690, when two German brothers moved to England. And of course that caused a lawsuit at the time. But here again, just stacked one on top of the other. Next. If you've been by my house, you've seen my 525-gallon jar. This is the same company in Germany, industrial salt glazed stoneware. Look at the size of that kiln, huh? See how that arch is almost starting to melt. Next. These are little pieces of clay. They were coils of clay put between the pots during the firing so that they could be more easily broken apart. They call it kill furniture, but it's kill debris. Next. This is a contemporary kill. It's actually a fiber kill. Those of you that know what house insulation looks like, well, that's melted fiberglass spun into a fiber, and that makes our house insulation. This is melted brick spun into a fiber to make ceramic fiber. It was invented for the spaceships and the shuttles and stuff. And I can take an inch of that and put a torch on it where the torch is orange, is about 1200 degrees, and I can't feel it. Tremendous insulating, tremendous insulating factor. Now, at some point in time, they made stilts and shelves. This is silicon carbide, withstands thermal shock tremendously, can be heated up and down many times. That's corduroy clay shelf. But see the lip to lip, foot to foot? Here's a whole stack of plates. So they're incorporating all of these ways of stacking. Next. One of the fallacies of the story of Jugtown is that they broke all that stuff. I don't believe that. They packed ware in straw at the time. Yes, they had this kind of road to come over, but there's other factors. the first bridge over the river was a toll bridge. They had to deal with the toll bridge. And they didn't necessarily have to put it onto the canal because our railroad came through here in 1853. The bridge was 1856. Jugtown started in 1856. With Jugtown starting in 56, and you have a major recession in 57 and 58, and guess what? Then you have the Civil War, 61 to 65. In my mind, that's what put Jugtown out of business. They were in debt. They couldn't pay their bills. They didn't have the business. Next. 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 So what I did with we took a lot of photos in Springfield of all these shards, and in all of the early writings, they say this Jugtown clay was fantastic. No, it was not. And I think this was one of the biggest problems. White never put his name on it, and as a potter, I feel strongly about that. That's possibly a little rock. You can see that the clay is just all kind of boiling. This is called bloating. And at 2350 degrees Fahrenheit, stoneware clay is like taffy. Now, if you get late reduction and it's pulling oxygen out of the clay, you're going to get bloating. If you overfire clay and it breaks down and gives out gases, you're going to have bloating. Major problem of Jugtown pots. Next. Iron pyrite. And there's also, you can see these voids. That might have been the coal. One of the writings did mention that, the coal was a big hassle. If they dug the clay next to the coal and crushed it all up, see, that the coal would help you throw, but then it's got to burn out. So remember Noah White's pots were so clean and beautiful? Look at this one. Next. 2 pots stacked together, just melted. See how it's all boiling, literally boiling. Next. This was a tray of bottle lips. And when I went to Springfield, I was hoping to rule out the use of Albany slip on the outside of pots. That's that dark brown glaze. But I can't. Here are some jugs with the Albany. This is under-fired Albany. I think they could have had 40% loss the way they had to fire. Also, look at the tremendous amount of color. That's your oxidation reduction. If it's oxidized, you're going to get the tans and browns. If it's reduced, you're going to get my light just went out. If it's reduced, you're going to get the grays. Next. Okay, this is the only positive thing I can tell you. These are lips. And see these lines, these grooves? I've never seen that before. That's the only signature I found from Jugtown in hundreds or thousands of shards. So if you find a crock, see, there was a handle on this one, with that line on the lip, I've never seen it before. Next. Here again, clay breaking down, iron spots, and it's gray. It was heavily reduced. Next. Here's oxidized, here's reduced, and I'm surprised this didn't bloat, because if you do the late reduction for salt, it could cause bloating. Next. Okay, the other factor, we thought, well, if we could identify pots by the design of the numbers, well, each potter had their own. See, they're not the same. Next. 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 This is a lid. This would be a jollied lid, and this design was in the plaster mold. And that's Albany slip. But the other thing is, Georgiana Greer wrote a book, American Stoneware. She came up with the term Albany type. And yes, Albany slip from Albany, New York makes a brown glaze, but many of these states have slip glazes. I have 4 in my basement right now. 1 from Utica and 3 from north of Route 80. And then the river silt. I mean, it's crazy stuff. Next. This is an eagle. I think it's a shard from a lid. Next. Now, these are the bowls, shards that we saw, and you've seen these in antique shops. They have a real thick, heavy lip. But see, this decoration would have been part of the plaster. So it would have been jollied into a mold and picking up this texture. I haven't seen these, in the antique shops. Michelle and I have talked about where the hell did thousands and thousands of pots go? They went to Chicago, etc. But when Mason and Ball came out with their glass canning jars, people threw stoneware away. It was too heavy. I mean, this stuff was heavy to use, heavy to clean. Next. Knobs on lids, too small. That's why your lids always break first. Next. So William White gets on the yellow brick road, goes to Morris. Next. Oops, this is a crystal. That comes from firing with elm wood. Next. And Michelle showed this. Now, this was in the 1888 Morris Herald, but we don't know the date of this artist's drawing. White came to Morris in 1866, left in 68. Now, there's also comment about Coleman made drain tile. If White, and first of all, let me back up. Jugtown went out of business because they were in debt. Who built this building? You know what I mean? In 1866, Morris had $16,000 to attract industry. I don't doubt he got a little bit of that. That's a tremendous amount of building. Those are bottle kills with flames coming out. I did the yellow, but no question about it. And so if White left and had an agreement with Coleman or whoever owned all this, that he would leave the kilns, those semi-skilled workers would just carry on. They wouldn't miss a day's work, and they'd continue making tile. How long those kilns were here, we don't know. But it's literally behind. This is where we're at right now. That's the building we're in. And the brewery wasn't built yet. The brewery was built, but not the big building that's here now. Next. That's what put Jugtown out of business in my mind. The Civil War. Next. Illinois Clay Products. They set up, I think Michelle said Hager started on the east end.
Hager in Coal City?
No, at Goose Lake.
Oh, Hager was in both places.
Yeah.
It was at the number 6 in Coal City, which is south of 113, close to where the high school is, and then up the EJ&E tracks north to where you're talking about, where Goose Lake
Yeah.
Products is.
See, Jugtown was on the west end, and Illinois Clay Products was on the east end. Now, why was Goose Lake there? Because of the clay. The clay would not allow the water to drain down, so you get a lake and a marsh. But this is Illinois Clay Product, steam shovel, massive amounts of clay. They brought in a railroad spur, train car loads left every day. Next. Mary. This is Illinois Clay Products Muller machine, one of them. Next. These are beehive kilns, and these are the kilns that Illinois Clay Products fired their brick. They made fire bricks, so you know, if you got potter's clay, coal, and fire clay, the fire clay is like 30 feet down. I don't know if William White ever got there, but Illinois Clay Products did, and that's your high temperature clay for high temperature brick. And they made a lot of stuff for the iron and steel mills up around Gary and stuff.
And Joliet, all the Joliet steel mills, everything you see when you go on the tour of what the steel mill works for the Goose Lake brick.
Is that what became AP Green then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. AP Green bought out Illinois Clay Products, and this clay is so deep, they have to pump water out in order to dig. Well, the water was so acidic. Clay's got a lot of sulfur, so you got sulfuric water. And somebody sued them and the state shut them down. Clay is still out there.
It's a new company out there now doing other things.
Deconstruction owns that.
Right.
I think that's my last. Any questions for either of us?
We just came through 200 years.
No, there is a test. If people are interested, this sometimes shows up on Amazon or whatever, 25 to 40 bucks. And it's an incredible book on the research at Jugtown. And he's also the guy that investigated the last barges that were at Armstrong Street, where Yards used to live.
Remember when they found the old canal boats?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
When the water was down so
Yeah.
low, there were 6 boats in there, man's
I just remember one.
Reduction,
I saw one.
oxidation. Something happened in this firing in a pot test, and this just maintained reduction and stayed gray. The salt glaze is clear. I did a master's thesis on salt. Salt glaze is clear, so it's dependent upon the clay below or the decoration above. Here's your batter jug. This is
I
a,
may have trouble here.
the thing about Albany slip is that they could modify it, throw some soda ash in it or lead or whatever. So that's Albany, that's Albany, that's Albany variation. Both of these jugs were fired lip to lip, and you can see scars. If you can imagine stacking a kiln.
No, don't do it.
No
Don't do
kidding.
it.
No kidding, wow. This piece I brought, it's also bloated. The other thing that I see now, heavy salt, heavy orange peel. Yeah, push that one, there you go. That's the fire site. See, I can tell you where they were in the kiln and all this other stuff, but that's the fire site. More salt glaze there than over here. They didn't care, you know, that didn't bother them. Pre-canning jar, that's your canning jar. Ray Rogers brought these in today. Why would they make a triangular drain tile? And his brother Bob's got a star-shaped one. But here again, toothpaste, the end of the machine, the die was that shape, and there was something in here making that. But this is just pushed through and cut, and then fired high enough to make the clay vitreous. And these are pretty vitreous. They would not absorb water. And maybe there were different purposes. To me, this flat doesn't have anything to do with a drain tile, but they thought so then. And here's another point. The companies that made these big machines that extruded this stuff, they also made the dies. So there's potters in Ohio and in Indiana and Illinois. It's got the same die. See, but if if a local farmer digs up a tile, good chance it's Jugtown. And that's really bottom line. Even pots, all we can say is maybe, maybe not. Mr. Corsello was given this pot. Absolutely, definitely Jugtown. And I forgot to get the man's name before Mr. Corsello passed away. But see this? That's salt, that's sodium. When sodium hits Albany, it goes yellow, or greenish yellow. And once you glaze these, you can't stack them. See, because they just glue together. How are you gonna fire it? See, there's a dark glaze inside. Might be Albany, might not be Albany. This is a Chinese sake. I didn't have a small jar, but this would require maybe a 5-6 gallon crock, 2 of them. So that when you stack the kiln, remember those little pieces of clay? You'd put coils between them. They'd be like that. A little bit of sodium gets in and hits the Albany. This might be Jugtown, might not. I mean, there is a lip just like this in the shards that we looked at. Turner, see that? Another pot sat there. Well, this pot was like this,
Didn't break it.
and another pot because the salt hit that area. Plus, it has a, let's see, it was fired upside down. That's an arch drip. And don't you dare call them turkey droppings. That's what all the antique people call them. I hate it. That's the arch dripping. And that being very, very dark tells me those bricks had a lot of iron in them. Like, not like our house brick would melt at these temperatures. But the kiln gets salted every single firing, and eventually that glaze, in the middle of the firing.
Sort of like my microwave.
There you go. The rib template. This pot was probably started with, I'm just going to say 15 pounds of clay. The wheel spinning, and you center it, and you put a hole in it, you open it up, you pull that up with your hands. There's finger ridges. And that's where these ribs come in. You can push against that rib and compress the clay more. Make it thinner, make it stronger. The smoothness is a byproduct. So your very last couple pulls, you're using this rib. You get up here, see, you've got your template. Now that's my lip, see? So all of the pots with that lip, I get paid for. And the potters would make their own, so if they, and a lot of these potters were, down south they were itinerant. They just went around and threw for people. But they took those tools with them. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering what they used to fire the kiln. Coal?
Wood first,
Coke?
then they went to coal, then they went to oil, then they went to gas. But Jugtown would have been wood and coal.
If you look on other maps around, on the same things we've been looking at, you'll see that the Peart brothers had all their coal mines right there. They were the farmers in the area.
Well, Jugtown had their coal.
Jugtown, yeah, well, Peart were.
Yeah. One of the censuses, there was like 22,000 pounds of coal at Jugtown. And like the guys here in town, they dig the coal and then make bricks. So it was a two-way thing. I'd like to know who went around Morris building these kilns. And I want to do another lecture later on our brick people, because Burrell Brick made architectural terracotta that went all over the country. It was made right here in Morris. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to also mention, you said on one of the slides that it was elm wood.
Mm-hmm. Those
It
crystals?
crystallizes, so if you use different woods, would you get a different crystal?
Great question. Every wood burns differently. Pine burns fast, melts more. Oak burns slower, melts less. I use wood ash in my glazes, 40% wood ash, and I love apple wood ash because it gives you better colors. Let me see.
I have friends that do raku,
Uh-huh.
and then
Raku's really low temperature, kind of opposite of this. But raku, you You glaze a pot, you put it in the kiln, it melts, you take it out, and then you put it into something that smokes. It's kind of a very immediate party kind of thing. Everybody likes the raccoon. These kilns would take days to fire. Who are your friends in town?
Sharon Danielson, Ottawa.
Do I,
Utica.
I used to. The kids did it with me. We'd barbecue outside in Raccoon.
We had a graduate student, we had a gas kiln at Illinois State and the flames came out the top. And we had a graduate student who made a metal barbecue oven and he got caught one night cooking the chicken.
Sounds like a college kid.
If you have any questions in the future, you want something looked at, I'm always anxious to look at pots. We gave this lecture out at the park in October, and Miss Hatcher was there, and was it July?
July 10th.
Anyway, I got a call from Miss Hatcher one day. They were digging post holes, and there was clay. Well, I got the clay, and I fired it, you know. I'm finding the surface clays are melting into glazes here. And who was it? Ray was talking about where those cattle were. The clay was right. Of course, out there it could have been, you know, hauled in. Who knows? But and anybody that really likes pots, I've got 900 pots in my house. Yes, ma'am.
So what is the time frame when you're looking at that kiln, you know, and they fire it up? How long would that take to get up to temperature? How long did it have to bake? And then how long did it have to cool?
Good question.
For the good
Those
cool?
kilns would have been tons and tons and tons of brick. So all that, not all, but the interior's got to heat up as well as the pots. I would guess that those kilns would have taken 2 to 3 days. Once you start a wood kiln, you're there. You know, you might do shifts, but you're going 24 hours a day. And this is a good point, and why I blew things up at 837 East Main. Your first firing, first of all, clay has to have all the atmospheric water out. They have to be dry. There's also what we call chemical water, which is combined with the alumina and the silica. It doesn't leave till 950 degrees Fahrenheit. It can blow up. So between 0 and 1,000 degrees, you have to kind of go slow, maybe a couple of 100 degrees per hour. Once you see color in the kiln, it starts to turn orange, that's 1,000 degrees. Then you can go faster. But my kiln at 837, I didn't, you know, I socked that propane to it, you know, and just had no idea what I was doing. My teacher had never built a kiln. I had never fired a kiln. There were no books on kilns. I don't know how I fired that kiln, or how I
There
designed
was
that
no
kiln.
Google. You couldn't Google it.
But it's kind of like, go for it, you know? Any other questions?
Oh, you said 2 to 3 days and it gets hot and then it's got to cool back down?
Yeah, I didn't finish your question. Thank you. Another 2-3 days. Because if you cool it too fast, it's going to crack. The contemporary art potters have gotten back onto wood firing, really for about the last 20 years. They're firing for like 10 days to imitate the Japanese kilns. Well, the Japanese kilns went 10 days because they couldn't go any faster. But you get a lot of fly ash. I looked on this pot, but a lot of times where I showed you that there was thicker glaze, okay, if you want to, but up here, it's darker. That's fly ash. You got these fire boxes, you're throwing wood ash, ashes fly through the kiln. And wood ash is a glaze all by itself. It melts too much at 2350. We have to put some clay in it and stuff.
In the Wall Street Journal last week, they had a full-page story about the making of Fiesta ware
Yeah.
and all, but molding it by hand and everything and how.
No, that's all mechanically jiggered and
Well,
jolly.
they're putting it. They had each person was at one little machine each and putting
Yeah.
certain parts on the bowl.
The thing about Fiesta, you know, they had uranium glazes and stuff. the first Fiesta. And of course, they had to change all that. Southern Pot, when I got drafted out of graduate school, I was sent to South Carolina, and I was pretty mad, 1969, not a good time. But it put me in proximity to the last Southern folk potters. And I got to know the ones in South Carolina, Georgia, and North Carolina. And the Food and Drug Administration came through and made them all stop using lead. Lead is perfectly safe if it's formulated and fired properly. All of our dinnerware has lead in the glaze, but it's captured in the glaze. It's only the cheap Mexican stuff that was under fire, there was free lead, that people got sick. But they made the Southern potters all switch. They had to go to new glazes and stuff. They went to salt glaze, I said earlier, because of lead glazed redware. Redware, earthenware, low temperature, 1700s pottery, stuff like that. They literally sifted lead, oxide or carbon, just pure lead, and that was the glaze. And one folk potter in North Georgia, Bill Gordy, he's gone, but he was incredible. And he was one of these itinerant potters. He could throw blindfolded. He was amazing. But he said, you know, they'd break for lunch, and these guys had their hands in lead glaze up to their elbows, and all they did was kind of, you know, and then eat lunch. So times have changed a lot.
Yeah.
But realize we're talking 160 years
Yeah.
ago.
That's what I mean.
We get pots brought in with the white glaze and the brown. That's 20th century. I mean, there's ways we can tell. Material and process, we can identify stuff. There is a William White potter. He was in Texas. I saw a thing on Facebook, W.M. White, and I about died. And the guy says, I've been researching this guy. He's down in Texas. So thank God I never found a William White pot on eBay or I'd spend a lot of money. We can't say that something's not out there. I've had 2 German salt glazed bottles brought to me, came from the barn or whatever. Well, that's German seltzer water. You know, somebody really liked it. And that pot was on there. Because something was found at the Jugtown site doesn't mean it was made there. There's 4 shards with cobalt on it out at the park. That wasn't made there. You know, that was probably one of the guys' liquor jugs. Potters like to drink. What did I forget? We have hundreds and hundreds of photographs. The museum's got a copy. The state park's got a copy. This is only part of it. But anyway. Yes, sir.
Hollow brick. Hollow brick?
Hollow.
Yeah, what do you know, like terracotta, red brick?
With the holes in it?
Well, the building I work at.
Oh, yeah,
Peoria.
I just saw that post. I've never seen that before. You just posted that, didn't you?
No, it was a building I worked at.
Uh-huh.
The building's made out look like regular bricks, but you go to drill in it, and it's only like.
Okay,
hollow.
that's the extruded building block, but I just saw, are you Bill?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just saw that masked man over there. I just saw a post today, and I thought it was yours, where it looked like the outside of a brick, and the inside was hollow, but I didn't know what it was. My garage here, and you know, I've got 60 years in clay, and I never thought much about brick and stuff till I got back and meeting Michelle and learning from her. But like in Carbon Hill and Coal City, when it went down those shaft mines for the coal, the clay was in the way. They had to get that clay out of there. Hager said, well, I'll come and build a kiln and I'll make this other stuff. My garage is extruded clay block from Hager. You know, I wish there was a way, I don't know if we can do it, but I wish there was a way we could connect the Morris brick makers with buildings and stuff. Where did Chapin's brick go in 1842? You know, Steep and Washburn had a huge plant where the old nursing home is up on Clay and Quarry Street. They're only in business 9 years. Huge production. And I said, this was another talk, but if you start up at Steep and Washburn, at Clay and Quarry, brick and tile yard, go a half mile south, you got Bucks Pond. You go a half a mile south, you got Jefferson and Nettle. You go a half a block south and you're back here. So there's 4 brick and tile companies all on the east fork of the Nettle Creek because the clay was there. And it's a low temperature clay for the brick. I would melt house brick. In fact, there's a Marseille. I got Morris clay out of the Lafarge stone quarry out off Ashley Road, and a Marseille's brick company gets it all. And he only fires to 1,600. You know. So anyway, there's a whole range. Any other questions? Mr. Black?
Yeah, Tom and Michelle, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and
Well,
experience with us. It was
thanks for
great
coming.
program.
It's no fun to just know all this stuff. The Utica, Illinois.
Isn't that interesting?
See you, Joyce. Good to see you. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.